Hi everyone, Sebastien Richard here for Thriving on Purpose. Today I want to ask you a question. I'm talking to guys today, okay? So this is for men. I want to ask you a question. Did you have a good father growing up or a bad father? And the reason I'm asking is I don't want to probe or make you uncomfortable or anything, but the reason I'm asking is because, well, I personally didn't have a very good father. And this caused me to have a lot of difficulties growing up as a young boy, young teen, and then later on as a young man learning the ropes of life. And this phenomena of how you grew up having many difficulties when you had a bad father is summed up by two words by psychologists. It's called the father wound. I'm going to give you a brief definition of the father wound. If you didn't grow up with a good dad, chances are you have a father wound, and many of us are not necessarily aware of it. Hence the pain and difficulty. Because at least if you're aware of it, you can fight it, you can do something about it, you can try to get some help. But if you don't know about it, you're going to have a lot of problems growing up. And I did. And I just want to try to save you that pain. If you're a young man listening to this, I think you're going to gain a great deal about it. But first, here's the definition of father wound. There's a man called Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons. He's a Catholic psychiatrist, which is kind of an oxymoron in a way, but anyway, the guy knows what he's talking about. He heads the Institute for Marital Healing, and he described the father wound this way, okay? He said, while the term father wound is not an officially recognized clinical term yet, it is used by many mental health professionals in identifying the origins of numerous emotional and behavioral conflicts in spouses, singles, and children. These difficulties can be the result of failing to have a strong, loving, and supportive relationship with a responsible father, or as a result of modeling after and then repeating significant weaknesses of the father, such as selfishness, excessive anger, emotionally distant behaviors, or indifference to faith. So in a society where the divorce rate is 50% on average in America and in Canada, we can only wonder what this is doing to our boys. And we've seen many signs, I mean, in the schooling of boys, in the problems that boys have growing up, which are quite numerous. And that is due mostly, in fact, to the fact that boys now grow up with their single mothers who are raising them. Their dad is either absent, their parents are divorced for many different reasons. Sometimes the father was an alcoholic, abusive, he had dependency issues on drugs or whatever. Bad fathers come in all colors and sizes and whatever, you name it, right? But the effects are really troubling in our society, okay? And it reminds me of something that I've heard in Fight Club. You probably are familiar with the movie Fight Club if you're a guy. It's become kind of like a cult movie. And in it, the character played by Brad Pitt, his name is Tyler Durden, is the epitome of the strong testosterone-like dude. Obviously, I won't tell the punch at the end, but Tyler Durden is like the smart, witty, street smart, testosterone-driven guy who's fully masculine, okay? And he said these interesting quotes in the movie. He said, "We're a generation of men raised by women." By the way, when he said this, they were talking about marriage and the merits of marriage, yes or no, whatever. He says, "We're a generation of men raised by women. I'm wondering if another woman is the answer we need." That's interesting. Another quote of Durden in this movie, which was very popular, is, "Our Father is our basis for God, and our fathers abandoned us." Speaking of guys growing up with a single mom. Then what does that tell us or tell you about God? So these quotes in the movie Fight Club scream father wound. And I think the movie was very timely. It addressed issues about men there's obviously a lot of violence in the movie, and I'm not recommending you go see the movie necessarily, but it's a cult movie for good reason. It touched a huge pain point in men. And here's the thing. A lot of men in our society have developed, growing up, whether they know it or not, a very deep and hurting father wound. And like any problem, knowing is half the battle. So, you see, when boys, young men, boys, grow up and they don't know they have a father wound, it leads them to a lot of destructive behaviors. It can lead them to joining a gang, becoming addicted to alcohol, drugs, just rebelling to society in general, quitting school, and there's statistics that are extremely troubling. I'm going to share them with you here about boys who grow up fatherless, okay? So basically these boys are fatherless, they have a huge father wound. Here's what happens. Boys who grow up fatherless are 5 times more likely to commit suicide. They're 32 times more likely to run away from home. They're 20 times more likely to have behavioral disorders. They are 14 times more likely to commit rape. They are 9 times more likely to drop out of high school. And they are 20 times more likely to end up in prison. Actually, prisons, it is proven that in prison, 70% of the men who are incarcerated grew up either with a bad father or abusive or absent, okay? So there's more stats on that. If you want to look online, you can find a lot of great stats. If you read my blog, I give the link to a lot of more of these stats that I wouldn't call them great. I said great stats, but actually interesting stats about the effects of growing with a bad or absent father. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me now, because I think it's more than important that I share my own story. If I'm going to be someone you can trust to give you good resources at the end of this video, then you're going to have to know a little bit more about me. I grew up with a father wound. I didn't have a model father growing up. Fortunately for me, he was not abusive, but he was a recovering alcoholic who never really recovered. So that was in itself a big problem. And my father was the epitome of the irresponsible man. I mean, he dodged responsibility as if it were some kind of deadly disease. And as a result, he was on welfare most of his life and obviously most of my young life growing up. And since he was so responsible, my mother divorced my dad twice. Yeah, you heard right. She divorced my dad, and then I think it was a few years later, I don't remember how many years later, she remarried my dad when I was around 9 years old. And then 4 years later, she re-divorced him. You can only imagine growing up in such a stable household, how well that went for me. And I was already a pretty nervous young lad. I was not the jock type. I wasn't very big in high school, so that caused all kinds of problems. We, as a result of my parents divorcing and being so unstable, I moved a result of, when I was 14, we had moved 13 times. And in all of my life, until the days of college, when I was in college, I had been to 11 schools. So I was basically always the new kid. And so I was very insecure. I grew up very, very insecure, lots of problems, lots of anxiety there. And so I had a very deep father wound. So here's what it did for me. I'm going to give you a list, a lowdown. I wrote it down. So I severely lacked confidence, obviously. I had to deal with anxious disorders at a very young age, up to young adulthood. I was bullied in high school. Hey, no surprise there, right? Bullies can smell fear, and they love to pick on those who are more nervous or fearful. I had to go through many trials and errors growing up. You know, when you don't have guidance, you don't have any set ways of doing things, so you go more like blindly and you try things, whether they work or not. Well, you know, you live and learn, right? I was also a very hopeless romantic who idealized relationships with the opposite sex. I mean, I put women on a pedestal. I imagined that a romantic relationship was the end-all and be-all to life and to being accomplished or successful. So you can only imagine where that led me in my first couple of relationships. I was severely depressed in my late teens and early 20s, and when I say severely, I mean suicidal, and suicidal to a point where when I look back, it was actually scary, okay? So that's where it led me, and I found it hard also to hold on to a job or find a good job. I didn't have any track record. I mean, my mom was a responsible woman. She had to work to provide for me and my sister because I grew up mostly with her in my teens. But my father, like, as a young man, you don't look up to your mom. You appreciate what she does, you are thankful for what she does, but you don't look up to your mom. Obviously, she was a better model of stability, but I still needed that man stability role model to look up to, and I didn't have that. So I have to overcome all these effects of the father wound in my own life. So I'm sharing this with you. I'm being candid here, and it messed me up pretty badly. But fortunately, I had faith in God, and faith in God can help you overcome a lot of the hurt in your past and a lot of the problems that you might face growing up. And obviously, my father wound brought up many challenges in my life, but my faith in God compensated for a lot of that. So God, even when you don't know it, through His grace, He can guide you through those difficult times. And sometimes, like in the Bible, in the scriptures, it says we don't really know how to pray, and the Holy Spirit intercedes on our behalf and helps us out when we're in a rut and we don't really know what we're doing. That's pretty much what happened. So it was an uphill battle. It was an uphill battle mentally, spiritually, emotionally, very much for me. But with my experience, looking back, I got through it. And I got through it with flying colors. I will talk a little bit about that at the end. But I consider myself a successful man today and a successful father, husband. And so it's possible for any man who has a deep father wound to overcome it. And that is the goal of today's video, is to give you these steps. I give 5 steps to overcome the father wound in your own life. And I know these steps work, okay? I've been through it, I've been there, and also I've done the research behind this little video to guide you and help you get through this, okay? So the first step you need to do is to shift the blame. I don't know if you remember the movie Good Will Hunting. If you've seen Good Will Hunting, great movie starring Matt Damon and Robin Williams, who is deceased today. That was, I think Robin Williams won an Oscar for that. Anyway, I don't want to digress here, but there's a scene at the end that is very poignant, that is very deep, and that is, I would think, the breakthrough scene in the movie for Will Hunting, who is a prodigy. He is a genius who has not followed the path that he should follow in life. So he's basically a bum. He does it out of fear. He does it out of self-limiting belief. I won't give you the whole movie here, but he desperately needs male guidance because he has a deep father wound that he carries with him. And so you have to shift the blame. And in that scene, that is the breakthrough scene in Good Will Hunting, the psychologist, his name is, he's played by Robin Williams, his name is Sean McGuire. When he finally gets it that Will Hunting is suffering from a father wound, he corners him at the end and he says, all these things that happened to you with your dad growing up, how he abused you and hurt you and beat you, it's not your fault. And Will Hunting's like, yeah, I know. And then he says, no, look at me. It's not your fault. And Will Hunting said, yeah, I know. And then, no, it's not your fault. And then he pushes it. He really tries to bring home that point. And Will Hunting just breaks down and he bawls like a little baby. And that's his breakthrough when he finally gets it, that all this suffering, all that his father did to him, that was not his fault. That's not his burden to bear. It's not his responsibility to bear that shame and guilt. And that really was the wings that Will Hunting needed in the movie. And you know what? That's good for all of us. I mean, all of us who carry a father wound, it's not our fault. And so you have to shift that blame, okay? That's the first step. Shift the blame. Your father's failures are not your fault, and it's not your burden to carry. You have enough to carry your own failures in your own life. Don't take on your father's failures on top of it. So first thing, shift the blame. Second step is it's the hardest step, by the way, it's to forgive. Okay, that's the hardest step. My dad was just irresponsible. Okay, he was never mean to me, and we did have somewhat of a relationship growing up. Even at times, it was a very close relationship. So I wouldn't even know where to begin if my dad had been abusive, mean to me, or if he had hit my mom, or hurt us in any way that was physical. But one thing's for sure, forgiveness is an essential part of the process to overcome and to heal your father wound. Okay? Is it easy? No. Is it worthwhile? Absolutely. It's really part of letting go. I mean, if you forgive your father, you're basically letting go of the hatred, letting go of because when you hold on to the hatred, when you hold on to these negative emotions, what it does is it's like holding on to your own chains. So when you are able to put this before God, because you're going to need God in this, you're going to need prayer in this, because for some of us it's easier than others to forgive our dads, but it's still going to require prayer, because he's the only one who can really help you to let it go and to forgive, okay? And once you forgive, you're going to lift, you're going to get a burden off your shoulders, you're going to get that release that you so desperately need to carry on to the third step, okay? And the third step is you need to empower yourself. Empower yourself. Here's the thing. When we have a father wound, we feel inadequate. When we carry a father wound, when we grew up with a father wound, we feel like, I can't do this manhood thing, this responsible thing, this good husband, good father, good citizen thing. It's hard for me. I don't know if I've got it in me. Here's the good news. You have it in yourself. You just need to believe that you have it in yourself, okay? God doesn't make junk. God makes men and gives them a great purpose to be leaders of their own lives, but leaders of their wives, of their families, and to really make an impact at that level first, and then you can move on to the next level. So you need to empower yourself. You need to believe that you can do this. Now here's what I wrote here. You need to believe, you need to decide it first, and you need to trust and believe that you can stop the cycle of whatever it was that was before you in your own father. If he was an alcoholic and you struggle with alcohol, you need to believe that you can stop that cycle. If he was abusive and you have abusive tendencies, you need to believe that you can stop that. If he was absent and he just abandoned you, you need to believe that you can be there for your kids. You need to believe you can be a loving husband. You need to believe that you can be a great dad. You need to believe that you can be a good provider for your family. You need to believe all these things. That's the way to empower yourself. And trust me, with the right resources, which I will give you at the end of this blog, the written blog, if you go on our website, there's going to be a PDF that you can download with great resources. They're going to help you with this, okay? You need to empower yourself and believe you can do this. So, fourth step. This step is so important. When I grew up, the thing I needed the most was, I needed a good, solid male role model. I mean, obviously, I didn't have it with my dad. Fortunately, when I was younger, I had it in my grandfather in my younger years. But that didn't last. He died when I was in my early teens. So you need to find good mentors. There's two ways that you can find good mentors. The first way you can find good mentors, if there's no man in your surrounding, if you don't have a grandfather, uncle, just a man who would step down and help you up, just a man who would be there for you, an older, more experienced man. If you don't have that in your immediate surrounding, well, guess what? There's a thing out there called books, and they can be huge helps in your life. They can play the role of mentors. That's what they did when I was young. I mean, it was a process, and books were incredible mentors in my young life. So what I did, I started buying books on manhood, books on marriage, books on all these subjects that I so needed. I mean, how to empower myself as a Christian man, how to believe that God is the ultimate Father. Books on these subjects will help you tremendously to be mentored if you don't have anyone around you. Now, if you do have good men around you, that's another story. See, growing up, I started out with books. And when I say growing up, I was maybe 18, 19. I started out with great books and great sermons I listened to on Christian radio. But then I joined I rejoined my church, my local church, when I was 21. And guess what I did there? And I think it was really through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. It wasn't because I was so smart and I had written down what I was going to do to heal my father wound. But here's how the Holy Spirit guided me. He made me model successful, strong, solid men in my local church. So what I did is I found these great guys who had a good marriage, who were good fathers, who were involved in church, in some kind of ministry, who loved God with all of their hearts. I looked up to these guys and I said, what are they doing that my father wasn't doing? And what are they doing that I should model, that I should do in my own life? And so I did, and I went to have coffee with them on a few occasions, and I asked them questions, and I learned a great deal from them just by watching them go. You know, just by watching these guys go, you can gain so much from that. So you need good mentors, whether in book form or in human form, but you need them. They're going to help you to get through this, okay? And that goes even if you're like 30 or 35. You can find a guy out there who's 45, 50, who's been through that, who loves God and who can really help you out. So don't neglect that. Now, the final step is, and it's really important, is to look to the perfect Father, which is God. God is the perfect Father. And what anchored me in my quest to heal the father wound was my faith in God, like I said earlier. And when you understand that God's heart is the heart of a father, and that he wants to heal you, that he wants to be your father, and that he wants you to have that close relationship with him, and to believe that he won't be. See, the problem is, oftentimes we fail to go to God because we unconsciously associate God with our own earthly dads. So if your father was a abusive kind, you're going to see God, your tendency will be to see God as an abusive father. If your father is distant or ignored you, you might see God as distant or someone who would ignore you. That's just falsehoods that you're going to need to overcome. You're going to need to understand the character of God, the characteristics of God, and trust him to be that father you never really had. And he will step up for you. He's never let me down. He has helped me every step of the way. And there are some verses here I want to share with you. Psalm 10:14 says, "But you have seen, for you observe trouble and grief, to repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless." And trust me, we are so very helpless when we're fatherless. Psalm 68:5 says, "A father of the fatherless, a defender of the widows, is God in his holy habitation." Another verse that's absolutely wonderful is John 14:18, when Jesus is talking about when he's going to leave this sphere of existence. He says this to his disciples. He says, "I will not leave you orphans. I, Jesus, will come to you." And he did it on the day of Pentecost in the person of the Holy Spirit. So, I want to conclude this video. I don't want to take too much of your time. I don't like going over 20 minutes. This time it's going a little bit over. So the father wound is an epidemic in today's young man or older man who are carrying the burden. And like you, I wasn't spared, and trust me, it took its toll. But it made me into who I am. Today, I am who I am because I had a father wound. What does that mean? Well, basically what it means is we pursue with more vigor what we lack. And what I lacked was this role models, this leadership aspect, and I pursued it so hard that, that I even eventually wrote a book on leadership. You know, when I look back, I told my wife the other day, I said, it's amazing because Lead Like a Superhero is pretty much a compendium of everything I so desperately needed to hear when I was a young man growing up, and when I was seeking role models, when I was seeking leadership, when I was seeking empowerment. And amazingly, that's pretty much how I wrote the book without knowing it. It's when I look back, I'm like, wow, I wrote exactly what I needed when I was growing up. And I'm going to leave you with this saying that I heard once that really, really impacted me. It said, be the man you most desperately needed when you were growing up. That's my advice to you, and I hope and I pray that God will help you to accomplish that. If you want some great resources to help you heal that father wound that you may be carrying, go to thrivingonpurpose.com, click on our blog, go to the Father Wound blog, and at the end, we're going to put the resources that you can download. It's a PDF format, and I give great books that you can read. I give great ministry sites for men that you can consult and go to that offer amazing help for fathers, for men, for young men who are growing up either fatherless or with a father wound. So just enjoy these resources, use them. They're great tools and they're really going to help you. I pray that you get blessed by this video. I pray that you can overcome this father wound, because it's only by overcoming this father wound that you can truly become everything that God desires for you. God bless you, and have an awesome week. Okay, bye-bye.